one. All right, so I think we've got a critical mass here. We can get started and we'll explain the functions in the webinar. We're getting some questions on that, so great questions. We'll just get started and go through all that. So here we go. And to kick things off, we have two of our co-chairs here. We have the supervisor of the town of Kirkland and the mayor of the village. So just like to kick it to the mayor to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. It's so exciting to be a resident and/or business in Clinton and Kirkland. We won this great award, $10 million. It's a little overwhelming, but incredibly exciting. So I thank you all for coming today. And I want to just say that the supervisor and I hope that you are dreaming big when you're thinking about your projects. And I know that this webinar will be helpful, but if you have more questions after it, we have all these good people to help us along this incredible journey. So welcome and pay attention.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Laura Lorenko. I'm with your consultant team. So I'm just going to go through the agenda here and sort of the first general introduction to the DRI. So as a general background, congratulations, first of all, on winning the DRI. So the community now has $10 million to help put together a strategic investment plan and to fund transformative projects. Part of that, 300,000 of that actually goes to the planning process. So the consultant team comes with that. We're part of that award, and we're here to support you all in the community, your local planning committee and the project sponsors to help put together your strategic plan, which I'll speak to next. So joining us on the call, like I said, I'm from Elon. We're the lead consultant on the consultant team. I'm also joined by Michael Indolo, who's practically a lead. He's our economist on our team, and so they'll be leading a lot of the work on the socioeconomic analysis and working with private project sponsors. And we also have today the consultants from Noresco and River Architects, so Michael Gurdrum and Juhi Lee Hartford. And this group is coming in to support with the decarbonization pieces of this, which are more robust this year, and they'll actually be supporting. So myself and Michael are the consultant team assigned to Clinton, DRI, the Mohawk Valley, Clinton-Kirkland, and Noresco and River Architects are actually assigned to everyone except Long Island, I think. So they're supporting all of the DRI and New York Forward communities for the decarbonization pathways. So excited they could join us here today. In addition, we have several other folks that are on our team for Clinton-Kirkland, architects, engineers, transportation experts that will help as we go in different aspects of this. So today, we're going to start with an overview of the DRI, especially from a project perspective. Then we're going to go through, kind of scroll through step by step the open call for projects form, which many of you are working on. And then we'll touch on those decarbonization pathways, which you'll get started on in the form. And then there'll be more done on that a bit later in the process as well. And then we'll have questions. And in terms of logistics, if you could, as you have questions as we go, if you could put those in the Q&A window. If you see in your tray, you have a few different options here. If you can put your questions in Q&A. There's also a chat if you can't hear or we're speaking too fast or something, feel free to chat us in the chat. But for ease of reference, if you can put questions or comments in the Q&A window. At the end, after the presentation, we'll pause for open Q&A. And at that point, if you'd like to speak your question out loud, it would be helpful if you could still type it so we have that record and we can see sort of what the FAQs are afterward. So if you could still write it, type it in the Q&A window. But there is the option at the end, if you'd like to speak, you can click the raise hand button and that will allow us to invite you to unmute and you'll see a pop-up so you can unmute yourself and ask your question. And we'll go over that again at the end. All right. So without further ado, a little bit about the DRI. So as I said, the DRI awards $10 million in state funding to New York communities to foster development of vibrant downtowns across the state. So the aim of the program is to really fund a range of projects that together support vibrant, walkable downtowns and downtowns that are going to catalyze sort of broader sustainable economic development and bring numerous economic, social, and environmental benefits. So looking for projects that have merit on their own and also are going to have co-benefits for the downtown and the community. So Clinton-Kirkland is going to use the DRI award to develop, as I said, a strategic investment plan, and then to implement that plan by funding various catalytic projects that advance the community's vision for vitalization, which will be detailed in that plan. This plan includes detailed project profiles for projects that are recommended by the LPC for funding. The state takes that plan and then they decide which projects in the plan will ultimately receive a DRI award. So I'll elaborate a bit on that, but I find it helpful to sort of work backwards, and to start, show you what a strategic investment plan looks like so you know what we're working toward. So just so you know, if you go to the Clinton-Kirkland page, you go to the About page, we have some resources listed here, including the guidebook and the Gloversville Strategic Investment Plan. So Gloversville was the winner for the Mohawk Valley in the previous round. And this is a good reference point if you'd like to be able to see what the strategic profiles look like. So here's their plan. You can navigate to the table of contents, and you want to go here to section 5, projects proposed for DRI funding. This is the full list of all the projects that were recommended by the local planning committee. And if you click on them, I'm going to go to the carriage house. You can see what a completed final profile would look like that might go into a strategic investment plan. This project did receive funding ultimately from the state, and you can sort of scroll through, you see the description, the budget, and some of these different pieces. So this is what we're working toward. We don't expect everything to be at this level by July 10th. We have some more time, but the earlier the better, because there are a lot of different pieces and there's back and forth as we put this together. So if you'd like to sort of have some inspiration or a reference point, you can see what it might look like. There's different types of projects in here. This is a private project for residential and for a restaurant. You see the Glove Theaters in here. So there's some different nonprofits and some public projects as well. So we encourage you to refer to this to get some ideas for filling out your open call for projects form. It is a previous round. Some questions are a little bit different, but I think it gives you a good sense of sort of what we're working towards. So we wanted to point that out. Now, the next question is, how do projects make it into this plan? What is the process for getting your project into this plan? So you have a local planning committee, and they will evaluate all of the potential projects that are coming in through the open call, which is happening now. We are here. Submit your project proposal. They will then, after their review process, recommend a final slate of projects in that plan. The total amount of those projects will exceed your DRI funding available. So maybe 15 million or so. And then the state will look at that list and they make the final selection of projects that will receive the 9.7 million and be awarded. So our schedule over the next few months here, the open call for project is open until July. So all the project proposals are submitted. There'll be an open house to get some public comments on those projects in August. And from August really through September, the LPC is reviewing these projects. And during this time, we ask sponsors to be available to be responding to questions. We'll be supporting you to help refine your project profile and also pull in supplemental materials. In addition to that plan, there's supplemental materials that get submitted to the state. So we'll be working with you to pull that all together, to support the LPC with the review, get them the information they need to make their final decision, which should be around November, when they decide which projects are going to be recommended in that plan. We finalize the plan. So there's often some edits and some back and forth with the sponsors on final touches at this point in November, and then submit the plan hopefully before the end of the year. That is the goal. And this goes to the state. They do their own review, and then the project awards are announced next year. and implementation begins. So that is the process. What happens once projects are awarded? The governor will announce the projects in the plan that are going to receive a grant, and then each project is assigned to a particular state agency and begins contracting directly with that agency. So state staff sort of take over here and start executing project agreements, and they're supported by other agencies and technical partners like NYSERDA as well. Something to keep in mind, DRI funds are structured as reimbursable grants. So you may need to, and you are allowed to, use finance mechanisms such as bridge loans, owner equity, so you can fund the program, the project in advance before you receive the reimbursement at the end. Michael or anyone else, anything, would you like to add anything on this slide?
All good.
Quick note was that sponsors FAQ was which of my pre-award announcement is reimbursable, or how much of my project-related costs are reimbursable, and I believe it's the post-award announcement. Is that still the same?
Yes, and we can let's go over that a bit more when Michael goes through the budget on the form, but key message is you can't be reimbursed for anything you spend before this award, before the governor announces the award and you're contracting and everything is underway and you're an official DRI project. Anything spent before then does not count. You will not get reimbursed for that. So please bear that in mind for anything that you might be spending before the awards are announced next year. Okay, something also important that's an FAQ that's coming in. Everyone does need to apply through the call, and everyone's sort of on even ground now. So whether or not you were in the community's application or not, doesn't matter. It doesn't impact your chances for being selected. Everyone has to go through the call. There's new projects that are coming in. So please don't be discouraged if you weren't in the application. It's not a problem. So finally, what if your project is not recommended in the plan or it's not selected for funding by the state? There's a couple different ways you can sort of get indirect funding potentially. So if you are not selected for funding, but your project was recommended in the plan, that still gives you a bit of a competitive advantage for other state funding programs, other grants, because it's showing that your project is sort of endorsed and supported by the community. In addition to recommended projects in the plan, there's this other projects designation, which is projects that aren't recommended, but it's kind of like an honorable mention. So they also have a little bit of this advantage as well to pursue other state funding, even if they don't get the DRI funds directly. Secondly, most DRI communities will put forward as one of their projects a small projects fund, and then if this gets funded by the state, then that's another way projects can reapply. If you have a smaller project that doesn't get funding, you might be eligible to reapply to this small projects fund and sort of get funding indirectly. So if you're thinking, well, I have a smaller project, should I apply? Please put in a call, because we do need to show demand for this small projects fund in order to request one. So we'll need to see that there is interest in that. And just in case your project is not big enough or it's not ultimately selected to go into the plan, it's something that we can make our case for the small projects fund. So please do go through the call. And then there are many other, if DRI is not for you for whatever reason, there are many other state funding programs available. So just wanted to sort of mention that there's the CFA, which is 10 agencies, 30 programs. That's open every year. It's open now, actually. It'll be open again next year. And there's various programs through the Regional Economic Development Council. There's Environmental Bond Act money coming out. There's a lot. So you'll still have a bit of advantage if you have this profile. You now have this advanced project profile put together. If it doesn't work out for DRI funding, there might be other places that you can shop this proposal around basically and still get some funding. So it won't be a lost effort, hopefully. All right. I'm now going to pass over to Michael, but I'll pause if there's any quick questions, clarifications, or if anyone wants to add anything for general background before we go through the form. Okay, and thanks. I see questions coming in and we're moving some of it over. All right, I'm going to pass over to Michael to go through the form.
Okay. Very good. So I won't cover the whole form. We'll go through the items that typically will trip up applicants, or little hints or tips that you can have as you move forward. Laura is showing you the link there. It's on that DRI website, the Clinton-Kirkland DRI. And it's the open call. So you can see the submission form button right there in the middle of the screen. Before I go through that, I will just say I'm kind of a summary level guy, right? So I'm going to give you 3 takeaways right now. If you have a pen and paper, I would suggest you grab it.
Mhm.
Number 1 is it will greatly help you if you engage an architect or some other design professional right now. You're going to need detailed cost estimates eventually. You're going to need renderings eventually. You're going to need a decarbonization description and other things that really you're going to have a big leg up if you have an architect helping you with that. Secondly, financial readiness is one of the most important aspects of this. So if you can demonstrate that conclusively, that's great. And then finally, as Laura mentioned, rather than reinvent all kinds of responses, really do go look at that strategic investment plan from Gloversville, and that'll help you. That'll guide you to a lot of the answers about what's an acceptable answer and what might not be an acceptable answer, right, for some of these. So let's move on to page 2 of this. This is just the description, page 2 of the document. Yep. So what are the eligible types of projects here? We'll skip the public projects. I know the folks on this call are all nonprofits or for-profit groups. So you're really looking at those 2 middle bullet points on the left. It's either new development or rehabilitation of an existing structure. So think about real estate redevelopment, right? That's probably where most of you are going to fall, is in that category. And then the third bullet point is the small project fund. And just as an explanation for what this means, the DRI committee may recommend a small project fund of $600,000. They typically do. We see that in many DRIs. That $600,000 is then distributed to a small project fund, and that small project fund is run by the village and town, and they are the ones that would distribute that to smaller projects that maybe don't get a full DRI award. So anyhow, you can click the appropriate box. It's on a separate page that says what kind of project you are, but you want to focus on those things. What you don't want to focus on is the right-hand column, right? We are looking for capital investments, right? In real estate in particular. So planning activities aren't allowed, operation and maintenance aren't allowed. I'm going to skip down. Program expenses aren't allowed, and anything related to an existing program or existing funding source. You can't use this to replace an existing funding source. Pre-award costs. Juhi was talking about that earlier. You may have already incurred, and you may incur other costs prior to an award. With one exception, you cannot use those pre-award costs related to your project budget. There is only one exception: property acquisition, and only if you acquired the property very recently with respect to undertaking a project. So if in the last, let's say, 3 months, you bought a building because you want to submit a DRI application, you can include the project acquisition as part of your budget. You will not be reimbursed. It is not an eligible DRI expense, but you can use it as a match in your budget. So that is the one exception. Don't put any other pre-award costs at all in your budget, because it'll just get kicked back to you as is not eligible. All right, next page. Here's some other requirements for you to go through. If you could advance that, Laura, please. So Laura is going to talk about project location. So project timing. Your project must be able to be completed in 2 years. Project funding, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important elements of selection is whether or not your project is funded. So you want to spend a lot of time in there explaining where your sources of money are coming from and how they're being used, and to the extent to which they're already secured. Another item is project size and scale. It's got to be transformative. You know, we're not looking for someone to replace their bathroom sink, right? It's got to be something that has a meaningful impact on the community. And then, of course, the project sponsor. And specifically 2 things. Does this project sponsor have the capacity to implement the project, both the experience and the financial resources to undertake the project? And secondly, do they have site control? Do you actually own the building, or will you own the building in short order? Do you have some legal hold on the building? And that can take several different forms. So I'm going to hand it back to Laura just to go over the boundary of the DRI and what that means for your application.
Thank you. So yes, we have here included in this the submission form, the boundary from the application. So the DRI is really intended to support compact, walkable downtowns. And so it does focus on this sort of core area around the village center. So to be eligible for DRI funding, including for the Small Projects Fund, you do need to be located inside the DRI area. Now, couple caveats. So this is the sort of sketch map draft map that was included in the application. We are making some adjustments because, as you can see, this sort of used straight lines. We're now going in at the parcel level to make sure we're not cutting, like here, we're cutting some parcels in half. So it is intended to include the whole parcel. And we're revisiting with the LPC just to make sure that this line is where it needs to be. So there might be some sort of corrections, some slight adjustments to this, and we'll have any updates, any adjustments will be ready by the public open house, which is next Thursday. So we're aiming to have those parcel lines and adjustments done while the call is still open. So you'll be able to see what that initial map looks like. The LPC is also able to make minor adjustments to this. So in addition to this, they're also able to make minor adjustments if they can justify it, if they can make a case for including a really exciting project that's not too far away, or changing the boundary for whatever reason to make it more contiguous with the village center. They can do that. So if your project is near but outside, still encourage you to apply for their consideration. If you're a mile away, it's just not possible. I'm sorry, the DRI is really meant to focus on this core area. But if you're a few parcels over, then you can apply, and there's a place in the form for you to sort of make your case for why you think you should be included in the DRI area.
All right, continuing on with the form. Evaluation criteria. What you see, so this is how the LPC, the local planning committee, and the state are going to examine and evaluate your project. So think about this as sort of your little cheat sheet for your project narratives, right? You want to cover as much of this as possible, right? This first item, these are the DRI state goals. I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them on your own time, but make sure that you show in your project narratives how you align with as many of these as possible. That's number one. Number two is our local planning committee will also create goals. They're not on this yet because the local planning committee hasn't yet done that. We will do that shortly. And you're going to want to also show a description to the extent possible that you also meet the local LPC criteria. Okay. We've already talked about these other ones on here: catalytic effect, project readiness, that you're eligible and that you're in the boundary. Cost effectiveness just simply means, is your ask reasonable? And co-benefits are things like, yes, I'm going to renovate my property, but that's going to have a bigger benefit. It's going to increase pedestrian traffic. It's going to attract people to the village and to the town, et cetera. Like, what are the other benefits that spin off of your project? So these are the things that the state and the locals are going to be looking at. Next page. This is very self-explanatory, but I will just say project sponsor. That is not necessarily the owner of the property. It is the developer. right? So whoever's going to be actually undertaking the project, that's who you want to name under project sponsor. One question we do get is sometimes people say, well, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to create an LLC in the future, but I haven't done that yet. Don't worry. Just say, development company, Inc. On behalf of a to be formed LLC. That's fine. We can always change the name later on if you do end up creating that. Okay, skipping ahead now, project location, self-explanatory, existing conditions. So what you want to do here, think about the current state of the property. So you want to describe the square footage of an existing building, the acreage of the site, what its current use is, what the history of the site has been, any challenges that you face in redevelopment, opportunities that the site creates, if there's existing tenants, what the tenants are, what they look like, if there's existing residential units. This is not your project. This is what the site where your project is going to be located, what it currently looks like. Number 4 on here, project type. This is a little confusing, and we had a Q&A come in here, but on this topic, this doesn't map perfectly to the project types that were listed earlier. If you have a small project that you want included on here, you would click either new development or redevelopment, depending on which one it is. It's most likely redevelopment or rehabilitation of an existing building. So most of the people on this call are going to click new development or they're going to click a redevelopment. New development is either you're going to completely demolish everything on the site and you're going to build a brand new building, right? That's new development. Everything else, existing structure being renovated, is redevelopment. Okay, project description. The very first type bit under descriptive title, you can have a little fun with this. This has to be like a five-word description that anybody can understand, right? So you have a few examples under there. Don't be wordy on this. It's got to be really tight, right? So, upper floor renovation, right? A renovation of upper floors. That's an example at 16 Main Street is an example of a project title, not some long description of everything you're going to do on the site. The long description is underneath there. So you're going to we talk about existing conditions before. Now we're talking about future conditions, square footage, acreage, new residential units that you've created. You're going to describe all the improvements that you're going to make, your scope of work in terms of like the actual construction project. We're going to renovate all the floors, or we're going to renovate only the 3rd floor, right? And we're going to create a new meeting space on the 3rd floor, and we're going to create a 3 residential apartments on the 2nd floor, and the ground floor is going to be retail, right? All of those things about vision for the site, the appearance of the site, if you're going to redo the facades, if you're going to redo the plumbing, you're going to want to put all that into the project description. This is what you're doing. Now, this is also the spot, and I'm not going to talk about this, but this is also a great spot to put your decarbonization scope of work. My colleagues will be covering that shortly, but if you have specific decarbonization techniques that you're going to do, insulation or whatever, you're going to want to make sure you include it in the description here and call it out as a decarbonization method. Okay, so moving on to the budget. This is one that trips people up in terms of trying to fill this out correctly. So this is all of your sources of funding and all your uses of funding. And we have 4 different categories for sources of funding. And people will often mix up what these are. Okay, so I'm just going to go over this. Secured, that's the top level. That is, we have $100,000 sitting in our bank account ready to pour into this project today. That's secured, right? Anticipated would be money that you believe is going to be available at the time, but you have a strong anticipation it'll happen. You've already talked to your bank. You already have a preliminary letter of credit. I'm sorry, a preliminary loan commitment. You're just working through that to get to a final disbursement. Okay, that's anticipated. Requested is something like, I'm trying to get another grant, right? I have applied for another grant, and I am assuming that that grant is going to be awarded, right? And then finally, undetermined. where you have not been able to fully identify what the source of the funding is. Now, sometimes when you fill out this, you might have two different funding sources that are both going to fund the same thing, right? So let's say you're going to put in, you're going to renovate the third floor of a building, right? And you say that's a $500,000 renovation. So your hard costs are $500,000. Okay. So you might have on the first source DRI for $200,000, right? So the action would be renovate the third floor. The cost would be $200,000 and the funding source would be DRI. The second line would also be renovate the third floor. The cost would be $300,000 and the source would be bank loan, right? So you're going to fill these things out. You might have engineering and architectural costs. You might have a building acquisition cost. Don't list DRI as the funding source if it's a building acquisition. You might have site improvements, like you're redoing a sidewalk, or you're redoing the grading of the site or something like that. That can go into there. I would again encourage you to look both at the example that we have at the bottom and in the strategic investment plan from Gloversville and see exactly how this budget has to appear. And then, because again, this is often one where people will not necessarily fill it out correctly. So the bottom three lines of this DRI funding, this DRI table here is the funding request. This is your ask, right? You are asking the LPC, the local planning committee, for $100,000, right? Your project cost is $500,000. So the total fund from other sources should be $400,000, right? If it's a total project cost of 5, you're asking for 1, 4 is the balance. Make sure that these numbers correspond to the numbers up top, right? If we add up all the numbers up top, it should equal the number down there. So you can see Laura was filling it out. We have 90,000 of DRI money and 10,000 of DRI money. That equals $100,000 of DRI money, and everything else is non-DRI money. Okay. Now you'll see in the example capital campaign as a source, and it's undetermined. It's the very bottom source in that example. I would not recommend this in terms of a source of capital. Financial readiness is a very important consideration in selection. And if you don't know, if the money's not secured and you don't know when you're going to get it and you don't know how you're going to get it, I would just pull that out and keep that separate. And then hopefully you can do that on your own later. That's going to be really a big red flag for the local planning committee and for the state. Okay, so let's move on to funding explanations. Here is where you're going to explain anything that is not currently secured, right? So if you say you've secured something, great, show us how, where you can provide documentation. But if you don't, explain what grant you've applied for. If you have a request out there, if you have something that you anticipate a bank loan, explain. I've been to Key Bank and they've given me a preliminary term sheet and I've attached it, right? One of the things Laura mentioned briefly at the beginning is that this is reimbursement, right? DRI money is reimbursement. So if you ask for $100,000 from the DRI program and you're awarded that, just be aware that you're going to have to spend all of your money. You're going to have to complete the entire project, and then you apply for reimbursement. So why do I say that? Is because you're going to want to explain how are you going to pay for that $100,000 DRI aspect of your project while you're doing your project, right? Are you going to get a bridge loan? Are you simply going to add more of your own cash equity into this? Are you going to seek some other source of funding to help you bridge to that reimbursement point? This is where you want to put all that in there. Okay. I think the rest on this is pretty straightforward. You have, own or show site control, describe what your experience is, describe the partners that you have involved with this, right? And that can be other funding sources. It can be development partners. It can be your architect, whatever. Okay.
Mhm. And just to underscore, you do need some kind of site control. You need to demonstrate that, but it can be in agreement with the owner. So if you are not the owner, definitely let us know how you have legal authority to develop this site in the question here.
And that can take many forms. That could be an option. It could be a conditional purchase and sale agreement. It could be, anything like that, right? A master tenant lease or something like that. All right, project readiness. This is along with financial readiness. Project readiness is quite important. It's probably those are the top two things. You want to show that you have everything ready, lined up. And when I said earlier about having an architect online, this is going to be the person that's going to be able to give you the studies or the preliminary designs or the detailed cost estimates or the description of the scope of work, that kind of thing. That's going to be key for filling this out so that you can say, hey, yeah, we have a really good estimate right now. We know what our solution is. We know what our scope of work is. You can identify challenges. Be frank about this. Hey, we're dealing with a brownfield, right? Okay, so but we've already characterized it. We've already figured out what exactly the contamination is, and we have a plan for solving it, right? All of those things in here you can put in project readiness. And then of course, you're going to want to have a schedule. So I would refer you again back to that Gloversville example, the Gloversville Strategic Investment Plan, because you're going to be able to see kind of what goes in that project readiness description and how other people have answered that question. You want to document where you have had successes in the past if you're a developer and how this fits in with that. Okay, resiliency. There's a little bit of overlap with the resiliency aspect and the decarbonization, but in addition to the decarbonization, whether or not this is going to add to any resiliency in the community from future natural or man-made disasters or anything else related to climate change or floods and etc. Revitalization benefits, these are anything related to jobs being created, housing units being created, beautification of the community, removal of blight in the community, taking away some source of pollution or some other disamenity in the community, and adding to quality of life, right? That's what the revitalization benefits section is about. And then finally, for me, before I hand it off, supplemental information. You will notice it says optional. And by optional, we mean optional for now, okay? Many of these things you really are going to need to have by the end of our process, not by July 10th, but by the end of the DRI planning process. So images of the project site, renderings of the proposed project. Every project sponsor has to have some kind of rendering, right? Typically, this is an elevation. So like looking at the front of your building, what is your building going to look like? What is the face of the building going to look like when the project is complete? There's other examples. You could do a perspective or something like that, but it's got to be a very clear, professionally done picture of the project as complete. Project readiness documentation. Again, I mentioned these earlier. If you have a detailed cost estimate from an architect, if you have a commitment letter from a bank, if you have a grant award letter from some other grant source, all of those things you're going to put into there. So again, my 3 takeaways: hire an architect if you can right away to get all those things together, focus on financial readiness, and look at the Gloversville plan to see examples of how people have tackled these issues in the past. We do have a question in the Q&A that I'll just answer live right now, which is, how quickly can one expect reimbursement to come through once a project is completed? This is a tricky question, but it does take some time. So you're going to get an award letter. It's going to specify everything that you need to get done. You're going to complete your project. After the project is completed, you're going to submit all the documentation that is required. So from the point where you have successfully and actually submitted all of the documentation for reimbursement, it can take 6 to 12 months after that point for reimbursement to happen. So you need to plan a bridge financing, bridge loan that you can be sure will actually last for that period of time. And I think that's done. So off to decarbonization.
Okay. So the next 2 pages make up the decarbonization aspects of the application of the form. A little background on it for those that don't know, the state of New York has a climate act that they signed, and they've made a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state by 85% by 2050. And incorporation of decarbonization measures and strategies within the DRI program is part of the state's plan in moving toward those goals, and hence the inclusion of it here previously in round 5 and then here again in round 6, and will be going forward. The 2 pages here are really going through some, questions and checkboxes to determine if your project will be required to meet decarbonization paths for DRI or New York Forward. And then for those that are not required, we would still encourage you to pursue it. And there are some of the checkboxes in here for that as well. So starting with new construction or building additions, really it's a threshold of 5,000 square feet. And, so these questions are, are you above 5,000 square feet and above, or are you below that? And if the answer is yes, then you will be required to meet one of the decarbonization pathways. If the answer is no, you can check the box to, if you're interested in pursuing it, and get some additional help and support through DRI if you are selected. Or, if you say you're under the 5,000 and you're not interested, that's okay. The next is for substantial renovation. And again, that's a 5,000 square foot threshold. Beyond that, then there's a more detailed definition on the next page with some criteria about what is a substantial renovation. And really, this is focused on things that are going to change the energy use in the building. So you'll see here, you check all that apply from these criteria. And if you're meeting 2 or more, it will be considered a substantial renovation from an energy standpoint, and you would be required to meet decarbonization pathways. If you were less than 2, even if your renovation was over 5,000 square feet, it would not be considered a substantial renovation. For these, there's the schematic or the diagram there to help with understanding. The first 2 check boxes are related to removal or change of interior and exterior wall coverings for the building thermal envelope. The building thermal envelope is really the dividing barrier between conditioned and unconditioned space. So that can be between inside of the building and the exterior, or if you have like an unconditioned stairwell or garage or some space like that, it can be the barrier between the interior rooms and then that unconditioned space. The next 2 relate to replacement of space heating or water heating equipment. And it's the criteria are if you are replacing the equipment 50% or more of the capacity for your building. So for example, if you had a building that had 20 tons of air conditioning and you were going to replace 15 tons of it, that's more than 50% of the space conditioning for your building. The last or I guess not the last, but the next replacement of 50% or more of lighting, whether that's interior or exterior. So those are the main criteria. There is a last one, if you're unsure, you can check that box and have some additional conversations and get some clarification. But these definitions have been updated here in round 6 to hopefully streamline at 5,000 square feet for everything. And then the definition here, an example for substantial renovation, just to help make that more clear as to what it is. For those that are, you've gone through the form, you've filled it in, and you are checking yes, you are meeting the criteria, then we will talk here about some of the compliance paths. And there are 3 paths that you can choose from to meet decarbonization for the DRI program. The first path is by meeting New York Stretch for your project. That can be through a prescriptive path or a performance-based path. So a prescriptive path for New York Stretch for the areas of your project, like if you're renovating a building, the areas that you're touching for a new building, it's just meeting all of it. But there will be prescriptive measures or standards for certain aspects, such as building envelope, like it'll have like minimum insulation levels that you have to meet, or window and glazing requirements, things for lighting and lighting densities, or like efficiency of HVAC equipment, those types of things. And so you will need to meet each of those that are applicable to your project. The performance-based path are for projects that may not meet each of the prescriptive, but they are pursuing some, very efficient systems overall. And this is intended for you to be able to demonstrate your efficiency and meet like an energy use intensity and show that you're at or better than that, even if you may not meet each of the individual prescriptive requirements for New York Stretch. The next path is through Energy Star and achieving an Energy Star score of 90 or better. This is actually using an online tool from the EPA called Target Finder that will allow you to project your building's performance for 1 year. So you end up inputting energy use information or projected energy use information for your building. Often that means you end up needing to have some kind of simulation or model or whatever to predict what your building's energy use is going to be. But you enter that into the Target Finder, and along with some other key building information, it will generate a score for you. And like we said, you're looking for a score of 90 or better for compliance on path 2. The third path would be through a third-party certification. We've got a variety listed here. This is not all inclusive, but it's pretty representative. There of the ones out there are some that are more focused on energy and the environment. There are some that have maybe more of an occupant focus. But if you, with your project, are interested in pursuing one of these, say you had looked at and were interested in LEED certification for your building, then pursuing the LEED certification would serve as your path for decarbonization compliance within the DRI and NYF programs. As far as documentation for these paths, this is meant to just be an overview, and you're obviously not doing this at this stage when you're completing the form, but just so you have it in mind as you're thinking ahead, and especially in planning the project budget and some of those things as well. Most of these are going to require you to submit design documents and then additional documentation specific to the path. So for path 1 with New York Stretch, you would complete what's known as a ComCheck report for the New York Stretch code applicable to your project. If you actually choose the performance path, there's a different form that's really just like a spreadsheet that you fill out and would submit For Energy Star, you submit a report that will be generated by Target Finder along with the score that it provides you, and a ComCheck report showing you meet at least the base energy code, which is required for all buildings in the state. For the third-party certification path, you include your project registration and a preliminary scorecard, any other submittals you have with that agency, along with the ComCheck report for the base energy code. So those are the basic requirements, and we wanted to share those with you here at this stage, just so you have it in mind as you're thinking through your project and your budget. And like the other Michael was saying, one, including, thoughts you have for decarbonization measures within your project description. And, even in areas like the resiliency, a lot of decarbonization measures can help improve the resiliency for your specific building and potentially even surrounding community. So, those are things you can think of as you're working through the application and the form. Decarbonization is not standalone, but it definitely plays into other parts of your project.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So before we open it up to questions, I just want to give a couple final messages here. So first of all, we appreciate that there's different types of projects on the call. So if you're listening and going, oh, I don't know what this means, or this doesn't sound like me, don't worry. A Trails project is going to respond to these questions and fill out the form. That profile is going to look quite different from an apartment project, an office project, a public art project. So, answer in the way and put in the information that seems to make the most sense to your profile, for your project. I'd also like to just take this chance to remind you again about the resources on the website. So if you go to the website under About, again, this is where you can find the example from Gloversville from the round 5 community. We also there's a very nice interactive guidebook that the DRI initiative, the state, made available this year. And if you go here, there's all kinds of information about the whole program. And there are also some examples under project profiles. Again, this is, considering final programs, but the final profiles, but there's some examples. I'm just going to scroll to some of this blue text, which for how to fill in some of these responses. So those resources are both on the About page. The open call, of course, is here, where you can get this form and find information on how to submit. And finally, a reminder of that cover page on the submission form. We are here to support you. So please reach out to us if you're interested, if you haven't already. We received many emails, so thank you for those of you who have already gotten in touch. And we are in the process of setting up one-on-one meetings to help answer your questions and help you guide you through the process and answer your questions. We also, like I said, have some other experts on our team, so we might be able to consult on certain pieces, on the energy piece, on architecture, on engineering. To some extent, we might be able to answer some of your questions or guide you as you fill in those pieces. And I would finally like to say hello to our DOS partners who have joined. So our DOS partners, Danny Lappin and Stefan Lutter, are very instrumental to this process. Obviously, they are with us every step of the way here and supporting the community, the LPC, and they're helping manage the consultant team. So they're a great resource. And if you guys want to add anything or answer any questions, please chime in. And with that, we will open up to some final questions. We've already answered some, but we can go through some others that we have missed. Please type them in. And if you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand and if you'd like to ask your question out loud after you type it, we can do that as well.
There was a question in the chat that because it wasn't in the Q&A, the response can't be seen by everybody, but I'll just say, the question was, for projects that require landscape design or contractor estimates, how important is it to have those pieces in place by July 10th versus having a clear vision, research, and planning for those components of the work? So the answer is, for July 10th, you can submit what you have. We recommend that those contractor estimates and those design documents be ready for additional submissions that you'll do after July 10th. If you have them already, submit with your call, but the answer to that is you don't need them on July 10th, but you will need them by essentially the end of August. If anybody has any other questions they want to ask live, you can raise your hand or drop it in the Q&A.
I'll chime in. This is Danny Lappin, and I should also add that, I think while a lot of the project sponsors, will work hard to get their cost estimates, the consultant team can also assist with that in some capacity too.
So your question, does a project need to be completed within 2 years or break ground within 2 years? When does the clock start exactly on that? Danny or Michael?
It depends on, this is Danny, it depends on the agency you're working with. So most for public projects that are managed through Department of State, our contract term are 5 years. So the DRI project would be required to break ground within 2 years and be completed within 5 years. Other agencies may have different requirements, but usually most track that kind of line. So long as you can break ground within that 2-year time frame, will be fine, and that you complete the project within 5.
Any other questions? I know this is a lot. This is also why we're available one-on-one to work through it with you all. Is there another community that has had a successful marketing branding proposal? Yes, there are several. And all of the strategic investment plans, by the way, are available on the state website. You can search and you can find them all. We're just giving you Gloversville since that was last year and it was also Mohawk Valley. I don't know one off the top of my head, but we could share that. If you want to send us an email, Molly, at that address that's on the form, we can send you some links to some examples.
This is Danny again. The city of Oneonta had a pretty successful branding and marketing campaign, and then the city of Amsterdam had a very successful marketing and branding campaign called Advanced Amsterdam. So we'd encourage you to review those two branding and marketing projects from the DRI.
For the one-on-one meet, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Judy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a question on behalf of the applicants on cost estimating. Because this is publicly funded projects, do they have to prevailing? Do they have to estimate like prevailing wages, or is it just what they think that a neighborhood contractors will build it for?
And Michael, do you want to explain how that usually comes together?
Yeah, it's different for different projects. Public projects are going to be prevailing wage. Private projects, my understanding is that the DRI funds do not trigger Davis-Bacon or did not trigger prevailing wage requirements. So if you have a contractor and you determine that that's the one folks you want to go with and you get a cost estimate from them, that's sufficient.
But in the end, they will have to do a public bid, like an open bid.
Not for private projects, no. Looks like we have Sharon Williams. You want to go ahead and unmute yourself? Go ahead.
Yes, hi. When will we get the schedule for the one-on-one sessions?
Yes, thank you. It's just, I'm about to put in the chat how to do that. So please, if you haven't already, email your name, contact information, and a few sentences about your project to amckibbin@edrdpc.com. Let me just enter this. And you should hear back within a couple days from the team. If you have emailed us and you haven't heard, please do email us back. Maybe it went to spam or something. So we should hear back from us within a day or two to start scheduling those meetings. Okay, I think that might be most of the questions for now. And that's sort of a good place to end exactly on next steps. Thank you, Joanne. So let me just get back to this. In terms of next steps, if you can contact us, as I've just dropped into the chat, and we can start those conversations with you. There will also be an open house next Thursday. This will not focus on the projects. This will be a general open house about what the DRI is. We'll be getting input on the community's vision for the DRI area and goals. We'll have information about the open call. So if you'd like to come, we'll be there. You can come talk to us directly and ask your questions in person when we're there as well. We'll also be at the farmers market on Thursday. So we'll be in town next week to chat. And that open house will be about visioning and some general, what is the DRI questions. So we won't be commenting on projects at this point. The second open house, which will probably be more around August, that will be, because then we'll have all the projects in, we'll have information that we can pull together. That open house will focus on the projects, and we'll have some information on every project that's come in available for the community to peruse and comment on. So that answers your question. And these will be, you can keep an eye on the project website. This is where we'll be posting all these events. And then we're also advertising throughout the community, of course. But the website is sort of the hub for the different meetings and public events and calls, et cetera, that are going on. So you could keep an eye there. And there's also different ways to contact us through that website, in addition to Aiden's email here in the chat. Okay, well, with that, thank you all very much for attending. This was a great turnout and for your interest in the DRI. We're very excited to start working with you and to see what your projects look like. And we'll be in touch. Have a great day.